Hi, and welcome to the Holocaust History Center in Tucson. My name is Kim Klett. I'm an English teacher at Dobson High School in Mesa, Arizona, and I'm also a museum teacher fellow with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I and three other teachers who are also MTFs, Museum Teacher Fellows, have had the privilege of writing lessons for this museum, and we welcome you here today to get a feel for what the museum has to offer. We are hoping that you will be able to bring your students in person, but if not, at least a virtual tour. And I want to give you a sense of what we have here, as well as how those lessons will connect to the artifacts and the exhibits here. And so behind me is a wall of photographs. These are local survivors, and I wanted to start here because this is what's important. This is the focus of the museum, is local survivors. And when we thought about our essential questions for these lessons, one of them is, why is it important for Arizona students to know about survivors who ended up in Arizona, and how did they get here? What were their lives like before they came here, and then when they arrived in Tucson or southern Arizona? And so behind me you see photographs of people who became all kinds of professions once they came to Arizona. If you look at the photographs, you see individuals who you also will see featured on identification cards that your students can access and read more about their individual stories. Your students will learn that these people became teachers and engineers and speakers, bakers, all kinds of different professions here in southern Arizona, and led very productive lives despite what happened to them. That can be a real influence on your students as well. Many of our students have had traumatic experiences already, and this shows them that they can move on to very productive lives and doing wonderful things with their lives with these people as their role models. Behind me is a panel focusing on life before the Third Reich. This is an important segment to focus on with our students before teaching about the Holocaust, because it's important for them to know that these people had full lives. They were not just victims. They had full lives before the Holocaust and did really relevant, important things relevant to our students. If you look at some of the photographs, you notice that people are doing everyday things. They're playing, they're posing for pictures, just like our students do. It also helps them realize that it's not just numbers and statistics we're looking at, but actual individuals, people with names, people with stories. Next, we have the exhibit on Reuben and Esther Langer. I love this exhibit because it tells an individual family's story. So again, we're not getting bogged down in the numbers and the statistics, but focusing in on one family's story. This focuses on the Langers, and some of the photographs that you see show different aspects of their lives after liberation. They were at Auschwitz, but then they were at the Bergen-Belsen DP camp, and you can see a photograph of them at the camp in an orchestra. It also shows the paperwork that was necessary for the family to get to America. And so, for example, you see their names on the ship's manifest to get here. You see the documentation when they came in, verifying that they were in the camps, and you see their paperwork. So it's important for students to see that they can't just come here easily. It's something that they have to do as a process. They had to wait, it took time, it took a lot of effort and a lot of paperwork. And this exhibit exemplifies this. It also shows, again, that these people came, they went first to Louisville, Kentucky, and then they came here to Tucson, where again, they led very successful lives. Here we have the timeline. Timelines are important in teaching the Holocaust because so many of our students believe that Hitler comes into power and people are being put into camps immediately. And when they think of camps, they think of Auschwitz. So it's important that they look at the entire history. Having a visual like this on your wall, which we do have in our lessons, is a great way to show the students visually, to see the systematic nature of the Holocaust. So starting in 1933, This one is broken down from 33 to 39 and looking at those early years. Hitler coming into power, going through the Nuremberg laws, Kristallnacht, and then really ramping up of people being sent to the camps. And then it picks up from 39 to 45, where we're seeing more of the mass murders and what our students probably think of when they think of the Holocaust. It also points out behind me liberation, which is an important area to cover as well, especially in the social studies, where you might do a study of American soldiers who were liberators and telling some of their stories. That's a part of this as well. It doesn't end right away in 1945, and we do have to cover the liberation and make sure that we honor those stories as well. As mentioned, the Holocaust doesn't end with liberation. Many of the survivors ended in displaced persons camps, or DP camps, where they stayed for many years. And we have several of their stories featured on the wall behind me, as well as in the lesson plans for teachers. The stories are really interesting for our students because they're so different. We have people who ended up anywhere from Tarrytown, New York to Mexico City. We have people getting married and starting families. Others come to the US and actually sign up for the Army and end up serving in the Korean War. Again, this shows the rich lives that people lived after the events of the Holocaust took place. Here we have our next exhibit, which is on rescue and resistance. There are two very important points to keep in mind with this section. One is with resistance, because many people don't realize that the Jewish people fought back. Many people believe that they went, quote, like sheep to the slaughter, and that is so untrue. We really have a lot of examples of resistance from the Jewish people, whether it's in the ghettos, whether it's in the camps, whether it's right from the start in resisting Hitler in Nazi Germany. And so it's important to look at those examples. The other factor is with rescue. And with rescue, we're looking at a lot of people who were not Jewish, who helped the Jewish people all over Europe. And while it's important to look at those stories and be in awe of what these people did, we also want to make sure that we're not too focused on it, because the sad reality is that they were in the minority. Less than 1% of all people involved in the Holocaust were rescuers. That also, though, makes those people who were rescuers and their stories even more extraordinary. And so we do want to look at those and make sure that we learn about them, but we don't want to make it the focus of our studies of the Holocaust. Again, there are some great examples here of people who were awarded for the work they did in saving others, and we must remember those folks. Since the museum is in such an intimate space, the curators wanted to make use of every available surface. You will see here in the floor a poem that was actually found buried in a grave with the person who wrote it. We have an activity for teachers that uses this poem with a blackout poetry assignment that we hope you can use. The entire wall behind me forms the last exhibit, which is Stanton's 8 Stages of Genocide. Stanton's first stage begins with classification. As you can see by the poster, the Nazis came up with racial laws that identified people based on how many Jewish grandparents they had as Jewish, Mischling, or non-Jewish. This classification was not just used in Nazi Germany, although it was used for the Nuremberg laws and made that a stronger piece, but it also has been used in other areas, even the United States. For example, you have the one-drop law of segregation in the US. You have laws that went against Native Americans for who they were based on classification. So this is an important place to start, not just in thinking about Nazi Germany, but here in America as well. The second step is symbolization, and this is one that our students are probably most familiar with because of the Holocaust. You see the yellow stars that marked people both in the ghettos and in the camps, We also have the inverted triangles that were used in camps to identify people by the types of victims. Were they Jehovah's Witness? Were they Gypsy or Roma? Were they Jewish? This doesn't only happen during the Holocaust. You can also see a Cambodian woman who was marked by a blue scarf in the Cambodian genocide in 1975. Next, we have dehumanization. Visual propaganda, as you see here, is often used in the dehumanization stage. You get images of the Jews in this case as insects, as vermin, meant to be exterminated. They're nuisances, they're everywhere, and they're dangerous. Organization is the step that, again, shows that systematic nature. This doesn't just happen. And in genocide, it's often portrayed as part of the war effort. And so they're part of that organization that's happening, and people are seeing it but may not question it. Polarization is the next step. And in the Third Reich, in Nazi Germany, we saw this right from the start when Hitler comes into power and needs to get rid of people who are going to oppose him. So you have people being arrested and sent to concentration camps for opposing the Nazi Party's ideologies. You also see this in Cambodia, where you have the peasants pitted against the urban city dwellers and the educated. The educated are going to be targeted because they are going to question what's happening. They're going to read the newspapers and see what's happening in front of them and possibly revolt or resist. So with polarization, you get rid of those people in those groups. Following the systematic nature that we saw with organization, we also see this in preparation. Again, it doesn't all happen at once. We see the camps and mass numbers of people being sent to them in Nazi Germany after Kristallnacht. This is in preparation for those next steps. They didn't foresee this all in 1933. It took time. We see in the Armenian genocide the map of the deportations. Again, this is preparation. It's planning and putting people in different places in order to get them where they need to be for that next step of extermination. The next step is what most people think of, especially with the Holocaust, but with any genocide, and that's the extermination, because that's part of the definition, that you're killing people in a group. In this case, we have the extermination that begins in Nazi Germany with the mass execution sites in Eastern Europe. And then we get the formation of the death camps, 6 of them in Poland. Again, this is what our students typically think of. And so that's why, again, it's important to look at these steps. It doesn't start with the extermination. That's much later. That's 7th out of our 8 steps that we have here. The last stage is denial. And unfortunately, we see this with every genocide, where people want to challenge the history. They want to rewrite it. Even though the Holocaust is the most well-documented event in history, or one of them, it is still questioned. It's still challenged. People believe that it was invented or exaggerated. The Armenian genocide was just recently recognized by the United States government as a genocide and named a genocide. The Turkish government continues to deny that, and we see that with every genocide, that there's some form of denial. And remember, this is a Holocaust History Center. A lot of what we do here is education and looking at the history of the Holocaust, but also what comes after. And so behind me is a wall that looks at the so-called crisis on the southern border. And there's a whole panel dedicated to this phrase, border crisis, which describes how it's misleading. It also focuses, just like in the museum, on individual stories. There are examples of poetry written by young people on the border. There is an example of resistance by Jewish Americans here in Tucson who protested what was happening at the border. This doesn't end. Just like the Jewish people in the Holocaust came to America and had to fight to do so and go through a lot of barriers, so do a lot of other refugees around the world. It's something that's happening every day and that people don't always want and are not always accepting of. Over here on this wall is a way for people to respond to what they have seen, both in the museum and on this wall behind me. And I want to focus on one of the comments that I thought really ties this all together very well. Anise N. says, "I'm a refugee, moved to America 2006. I had the chance to be free, unlike my family. I moved because my religion wasn't good enough," which has such an important connection, again, to the stories that we learn about here from our Southern Arizona survivors and survivors all over the world. Thank you so much for joining me on this special tour of this History Center. I'm so glad that you are able to see it virtually. I hope that you're able to come soon and visit yourself in person and maybe even bring your students. We would love to have you.